For centuries, maps have been humanity's way of asserting order over uncertainty. Rivers were traced, mountains outlined, borders negotiated in ink long before they were enforced in stone. Forests, too, were measured and tamed on parchment reduced to green textures and labeled expanses, made legible to those who might never walk beneath their canopies. Yet in one region of Europe, cartographers encountered a woodland that resisted this process so completely that it became an embarrassment to record and a danger to ignore. The forest appeared early in regional surveys, marked with the same confidence as surrounding hills and villages. It had a name, though that name changed spelling from map to map. It occupied a known stretch of land between two rivers, neither of which ever moved. And yet, from the earliest attempts to chart its interior, something went wrong. Paths did not stay where they were drawn. The first complaints were subtle. A surveyor in the late 17th century noted that a footpath he had followed the previous summer could not be found again, despite clear memory of its bends and landmarks. He assumed overgrowth or error. Another cartographer, decades later, reported that a charcoal marker placed on a beech tree vanished within days, not fallen, not cut, simply gone. These incidents were dismissed individually, the way all anomalies are at first. It was only when maps were compared across generations that the problem became undeniable. Trails that should have intersected did not. Clearings appeared and disappeared. The forest's edges, when measured carefully, seemed to bulge or contract by small but measurable distances. Never dramatically, never enough to provoke panic, but consistently enough to undermine confidence. When corrected, the new measurements would hold for a time, then drift again. By the early 18th century, survey teams began reporting issues with their instruments. Compasses behaved erratically once inside the tree line. Needles wavered, then spun, then settled pointing in directions that did not correspond with known magnetic variation. Outside the forest, the same compasses worked perfectly. Attempts to explain this through iron deposits failed. Geological samples showed nothing unusual. No magnetic ore, no buried structures. Nothing that could account for the behavior. More troubling still was the fate of survey markers. Wooden stakes hammered into the soil vanished overnight. Stone cairns collapsed or were scattered without signs of human interference. In one documented case, a brass benchmark embedded in rock was recovered weeks later several meters from its original position, scratched but intact. No footprints surrounded it. As the technical explanations faltered, older voices grew louder. Local folklore had always warned against the forest, though not in the dramatic way outsiders expected. There were no tales of monsters or curses in the conventional sense. Instead, the warnings were practical, almost mundane. Do not cut straight paths. Do not mark your way too carefully. And above all, do not count the trees. The last warning appeared repeatedly in oral traditions recorded by clergy and antiquarians. Children were told that counting trees would make them lose their place. Shepherds said numbers never stayed the same. Woodcutters claimed that if you counted trunks in the morning and again in the afternoon, you would come up short or long by one or two, even if you swore you stood in the same spot. Early scholars dismissed this as metaphor. Forests are dense. Perspective shifts. Human memory is unreliable. But as mapping failures mounted, the warnings took on a different tone. One 19th century cartographer, unusually meticulous, attempted a full triangulation of the forest interior. He established reference points outside the woodland and worked inward, measuring angles and distances with mathematical rigor. His notes, preserved in fragments, reveal growing frustration. Distances close correctly, he wrote, until they do not. Triangles that should have resolved neatly instead produced small discrepancies, fractions of degrees, centimeters of error. Individually negligible, collectively devastating. The more measurements he took, the less the data agreed with itself. He repeated the work in winter when leaves were gone and visibility improved. The discrepancies persisted. When he attempted to reconcile the data by averaging values, the resulting map bore little resemblance to reality. Paths overlapped themselves. Clearings appeared inside streams. The forest, when rendered mathematically, became impossible. The project was abandoned. By the late 19th century, official maps began treating the forest differently. Instead of detailing its interior, cartographers shaded it as a uniform mass. Trails were drawn only to the edge, then faded. Notes appeared in margins. Poorly surveyed. Unreliable interior. In one case, simply avoid. Meanwhile, those who lived near the forest adapted in ways outsiders found strange. Villagers navigated by habit rather than landmarks. They spoke of routes in terms of time and feeling rather than distance. Walk until the light thins, they would say. Turn where the ground softens. Directions were conditional, not fixed. When pressed, they explained that the forest did not like being fixed. This was not said with fear, but with resignation. The most disturbing accounts came from those who tried to impose order anyway. A forestry commission in the early 20th century attempted to inventory the woodland for timber management. Crews were instructed to count and tag trees within designated plots. The tags numbered metal discs were nailed at chest height. Within weeks, the inventory collapsed. Tags went missing. Numbers repeated themselves in non-adjacent areas. Plots overlapped when they should not have. One forester reported finding the same numbered tree on 2 different days in 2 different locations. He was reassigned shortly afterward. The official report cited human error and environmental interference. Privately, the commission halted the project. Stories circulated of travelers entering the forest with clear plans and emerging disoriented, not lost in space but in sequence. They would insist they had walked for hours when only minutes had passed, or vice versa. Watches disagreed. Journals showed entries written out of order. None of this was dramatic enough to attract widespread attention, but it was consistent. One recurring detail appeared in multiple accounts. People who attempted to track their movement too precisely, counting steps, marking turns, measuring distances, fared worse than those who wandered. The forest, it seemed, resisted being reduced to numbers. Modern technology fared no better. Aerial surveys produced contradictory images depending on altitude and angle. Satellite data showed subtle inconsistencies between passes taken days apart. GPS signals degraded unpredictably under the canopy, not failing outright, but drifting just enough to be untrustworthy. Scientists proposed explanations involving microtopography, signal multipath effects, cognitive bias. Each explanation addressed part of the phenomenon. None addressed it fully. What makes the forest uniquely unsettling is not that it confuses travelers, many forests do, but that it undermines record-keeping itself. Maps are not just navigational tools. They are assertions of permanence. To map something is to say it exists in a stable relationship with the world. This forest refuses that assertion. Folklore suggests a reason, though it is never stated directly. In the oldest versions of the warnings, the forest is not described as dangerous or malicious. It is described as older than boundaries, older than counting. One tale speaks of the forest as a place that keeps its own measure. Another says it remembers when numbers were not needed. In that context, the shifting paths and vanishing markers take on a different meaning. They are not traps, but corrections. The forest does not punish intrusion. It simply declines to cooperate with attempts to freeze it in abstraction. Those who accept its fluidity can pass through. Those who try to fix it, to pin it down with stakes and coordinates, find their work undone. Today, the forest remains on maps as a green blur. Hikers are advised to stay on established trails, though even those are updated regularly. Surveyors still debate whether a definitive map is possible. Most agree it is not worth the effort. And among locals, the old warning persists, passed down without explanation. Do not count the trees. Not because the forest will harm you, but because the moment you insist on knowing exactly how many there are, the answer will change.